First, I want to thank Executive Director Dirk Ficker for making it possible for me to join you, even though remotely. I occupy a privileged position these days, best explained by a cartoon in New Yorker magazine. This little boy is looking up his father, and he says, "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be a former president." Well, I'm no longer in public office, so I'm able to receive exciting invitations like this, and also to speak without restraint on somewhat controversial subjects. I'm pleased to address the Parliament of World Religions about the vital role of religion in providing a foundation for or correcting the global scourge of discrimination and violence against women. As will be seen, my remarks represent the personal views of a Christian layman and a former political leader. There are international agreements as well as our own holy scriptures that guide us. Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, and I quote, "Everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, or other kinds of things." The Holy Bible tells us that, and I quote again, "There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither bond nor free. There is neither male nor female. For you are all one in Christ Jesus." That's Paul's letter to the Galatians 3:28. Every genetic religious text encourages believers to respect essential human dignity. Yet some selected scriptures are interpreted to justify the derogation or inferiority of women and girls, our fellow human beings. All of us have a responsibility to acknowledge and to address the gross acts of discrimination and violence against women that occur every day. Here are some well-known examples. Globally, at least 1 in 3 women and girls is beaten or sexually abused in her lifetime. That's the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, published in 2000. Our Carter Center has been deeply involved in the Republic of Congo. In war zones where order has broken down, horrific and sometimes lethal rape has become a tactic of warfare practiced by all sides. In a study in the year 2000, the United Nations estimated that at least 60 million girls who should be alive are missing from various populations, mostly in Asia, as a result of sex-selected abortions, infanticide, or neglect. According to UNICEF, an estimated 1 million children, mostly girls, enter the sex trade each year, and the UN estimates that 4 million women and girls are trafficked annually. In some Islamic nations, women are restricted in their movements, punished for permitting the exposure of an arm or an ankle, deprived of education, prohibited from driving a car or competing with men for a job. If a woman is raped, she is often most severely punished as a guilty party in the crime. The same discriminatory thinking lies behind the continuing gender gap in pay and explains why so few women hold public office, even in most Western democracies. You're all familiar with these facts. I know you're considering the causes and possible solutions to this serious global problem. There are clear indications that progress is being made in the secular world. We've seen women chosen as leaders in nations as diverse as India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Israel, Great Britain, Ireland, Chile, Germany, the Philippines, and Nicaragua. Their support came from citizens who are predominantly Hindu, Islamic, Jewish, and Christian, and include 2 of the 3 largest democracies on earth. It is ironic that women are now welcomed into all the major professions and other positions of authority, but are branded as inferior and deprived of the equal right to serve God in positions of religious leadership. The plight of abused women is made more acceptable by the mandated subservience of women by religious leaders. Most Bible scholars acknowledge that the Holy Scriptures were written when male dominance prevailed in every aspect of life. Men could have multiple sex partners. We know King Solomon had 300 wives and 700 concubines. But adulterous behavior by a woman could be punished by stoning to death, both then, later in the time of Christ, and in some societies, 2009 years after Christ was born. I realize that devout Christians can find adequate scriptures to justify either side in this debate, but there is one incontrovertible fact concerning the relationship between Jesus Christ and women. He never condoned sexual discrimination or the implied subservience of women. The exaltation and later reverence for Mary as Jesus' mother is an even more vivid indication of the special status of women in Christian theology. I have taught Bible lessons for more than 65 years, and I know that Paul forbade women to worship with their heads uncovered, to braid their hair, or to wear rings or jewelry or expensive clothes. It's obvious to most modern-day Christians that Paul was not mandating permanent or generic theological policies. In a letter to Timothy, Paul also expresses a prohibition against women's teaching men. But we know, and he knew, that Timothy himself was instructed by his mother and his grandmother. At the same time, in Paul's letters to the Romans, he listed and thanked 28 outstanding leaders of the early churches, at least 10 of whom were women. And I quote from Paul, "I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a deacon of the church. Greet Prisca and Aquila, who worked with me in Christ Jesus. Greet Mary, who has worked very hard among you. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my relatives who were in prison with me. They are prominent among the apostles, and they were in Christ before I was. Greet Philologus, Julia, Nereus, and his sister, and Olympus, and all the saints who were with them." It's clear that during the early Christian era, women served as deacons, priests, bishops, apostles, teachers, and prophets. It wasn't until the 4th century, or the 3rd at the earliest, that dominant Christian leaders, all men, twisted and distorted Holy Scriptures to perpetuate their ascendant positions within the religious hierarchy. My own Southern Baptist Convention leaders ordained in recent years that women must be subservient to their husbands and prohibited from serving as deacons, pastors, chaplains in the military service, or teachers of men. They based this on a few carefully selected quotations from St. Paul and also from Genesis, claiming that Eve was created second to Adam and was responsible for original sin. This was in conflict with my own personal belief that we are all equal in the eyes of God. The Roman Catholic Church and many others revere the Virgin Mary, but consider women unqualified to serve as priests. This view that the Almighty considers women to be inferior to men is not restricted to one religion or tradition. Its influence does not stop at the walls of the church, the mosque, the synagogue, or temple. Women are prevented from playing a full equal role in many faiths, creating an environment in which violations against women are justified. The truth is that male religious leaders have had, and they still have, an option to interpret Holy Scripture teachings either to exalt or to subjugate women. They have, for their own selfish ends, overwhelmingly chosen the latter, subjugation. Their continuing choice provides a foundation or justification for much of the pervasive persecution and abuse of women throughout the world. This is in clear violation not just of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but also the teachings of Jesus Christ, the Apostle Paul, Moses and the prophets, Muhammad, the founders of other great religions, all of whom have called for proper and equitable treatment of all the children of God. It is time we had the courage to challenge these views and set a new course that demands equal rights for women and men, for girls and boys. At their most repugnant, the belief that women are inferior human beings in the eyes of God gives excuses to the brutal husband who beats his wife, the soldier who rapes a woman, the employer who has a lower pay scale for women employees, or parents who decide to abort a female embryo. It also costs many millions of girls and women control over their own bodies and lives, and continues to deny them fair and equal access to education, health care, employment, and influence within their own communities. Recently, I presented my concerns to a group of fellow leaders known as the Elders, who represent practicing Protestants and Catholics and Muslims and Hindus. We are no longer active in politics and are free to express our honest opinions. We decided collectively to draw particular attention to the role of religious and traditional leaders in obstructing the campaign for equality and human rights, and promulgated a statement that declares, and I quote, "the justification of discrimination against women and girls on grounds of religion or tradition, as if it were prescribed by a higher authority, is unacceptable." Having served as local, state, national, and world leaders, we understand why many public officials can be reluctant to question ancient religious and traditional premises, an arena of great power and sensitivity. Despite this, we are calling on all those with influence to challenge and to change the harmful teachings and practices in religious and secular life that justify discrimination against women, and to acknowledge and emphasize the positive messages of equality and human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, President Carter. It's an absolute honor and pleasure to be here with you, and I thank you for your incredible remarks. We'd like to welcome in at this point the Parliament in Melbourne joining us, and they've given me the honor of presenting you with a few questions. Our first question is, why focus on the equality of women and girls now?
Well, it's not just a recent concern of mine. During my life, particularly since I've been in public office, I've seen that there is almost an ingrained and widely accepted premise in the secular and religious world to treat women as secondary citizens in the eyes of the state and also in the eyes of God. And this has concerned me. I would say that I have been most familiar with the practice of the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox and others who don't permit women to serve as priests, but let them serve as nuns and nurses and so forth. That's a discrimination with which I didn't agree. But it really became more vivid to me about the year 2000 when, as I said here, my own Southern Baptist Convention, where I was one of the leaders in the convention, made rulings about the subjugation and derogation of women that I really couldn't accept personally. And my wife and I just announced that we would no longer be part of the Southern Baptist Convention organization. And so we have continued as Baptists, but in a church where my wife Rosen is a deacon, and am I, where our pastor is a man, and we have a co-pastor who is a woman, and we have other women deacons. And I would say that many of the more moderate Baptists now, as well as other denominations, now treat women as complete equals in the eyes of God in the church functions as leaders. So this is a long-standing concern of mine. And I've made some public speeches in Ireland and other places just pointing out that one of the basic causes of the acceptance of discrimination on a sexual basis in secular society is based on the premise that religious leaders say that women are inferior in the eyes of God. And so this has been a major concern of mine. And when the elders was organized just a couple of years ago, this was one of the things that I put on the table. And I was very lucky to find out that Bishop Tutu, who is a fellow Protestant, and Mary Robinson, and former President Cardoso of Brazil, who are Catholics, and Lakhdar Brahimi, who happens to be Muslim, and Elif Bhatt, who is a Hindu, all agreed with me unanimously. So we've been able to promulgate it a little more widely than before. But it's not a new subject with me.
Fantastic. You mentioned Mary Robinson and Desmond Tutu and various international actors that have been contending with this issue for quite some time. And my curiosity is, in all of your travels, part of what the Parliament wants to know is, how, in your kind of international experience, what are some of the ways, or can you think of a particular example in which you've seen this issue attended to with particularly well or with great strength?
I can't say that I've seen it make much progress in the religious community. But as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, in many of the greatest nations in the world, women have been chosen by their own fellow citizens to be the leaders. The largest democracy on earth happens to be Hindu in India, and we know that Mrs. Gandhi and others served there. The second largest democracy on earth is the United States. We haven't chosen a woman yet, but we have women prominently in government. And I would say the third is Indonesia. The Carter Center monitored the election there, and a woman was chosen to be the president of Indonesia. So in the secular world, women have made some progress. The Scandinavian countries probably do the best job in ensuring that members of Parliament are served from both sexes on a basically equal basis. And what's been interesting to me, I mentioned that the Carter Center helps with elections. We've monitored more than 70 elections on Earth. And last year we helped with the election in Nepal. And part of the new proposal was that a substantial portion of all the elected delegates to write a new constitution had to be women. And we are now preparing for an election in Sierra Leone, and Sierra Leone people, not us, have adopted the same premise that a certain portion of those elected must be women, and they have a separate ballot, as a matter of fact, just for women candidates. So in governmental affairs, women are making good progress, I would say, in the political arena. They are making some progress also perhaps in equality in job opportunities as executive directors of corporations, and also approaching equality in pay. In the United States now, though, a woman gets about 70% as much pay for the same service, maybe superior service. I can't say about that, sure. But we are making some progress. But the main obstacle, in my opinion, is a continued, sustained belief in the Islamic world, in the Roman Catholic Church and others, and in some Protestant denominations like the Southern Baptist Convention, that women are doomed to be treated as secondary in the eyes of God by being deprived of a right to serve equally with men in their chosen faith.
That transitions actually perfectly into our final question from the Parliament, which, given the charter of the Parliament, they want to know, what do you see as the role of various religious communities in moving forward the issues of women and girls?
Well, I think every local congregation, no matter what denomination it might be, no matter what faith it might be, can start an effort in that local community to treat women equally within the religious community, even though it might create some dissension or disagreements with their neighboring churches, synagogues, mosques, and so forth. So the ones that attend this conference, when they go home, I think have a responsibility personally to start making sure that women are treated equally within the religious community that they serve. Another thing that can be done, I believe, is on a more broad base, like within a denomination. We've seen the furor that's been created, for instance, in the Anglican Episcopal Church, because some militant and deeply convinced leaders wanted to give equal opportunity to homosexuals. Well, that's, I think, a much more controversial issue than giving women equal rights. And why not address it within the Catholic Church and within the Southern Baptist Convention and within the Islamic communities to demand that within a generic sense that women are treated equally. I don't think it would be hard to convince the participants in this particular conference that in the eyes of God, women ought to be treated equally. Okay, let's fight for it to a maximum degree, locally and as broad-based a forum as we can possibly address depending on our own influence. And we need not be timid. I think we need to be very forceful, speak out, and I think there's a great eager audience among those who are now silent on the subject that have long been concerned, like I have and others, that that situation ought to be changed. I think there would be a resounding positive response to more militant demands that women are equal to men in every aspect of life.
And the onus is on each of us to rise up in ourselves to make that happen.
The onus or the responsibility.
Exactly.
Onus if we don't do it.
Right.
Gratification if we do.
Well, I can just say humbly from the council on behalf, I know everyone is watching from Melbourne, Australia. It's a true honor to be with you tonight, and I greatly appreciate your remarks and very much look forward to hearing the inspired comments that I'm sure they will lead to in Australia.
Well, I hope so, and I'd like to get some feedback on what they say after I get off the screen.
Well, wonderful. So from us here at the Carter Center, for myself, Michael Trainer, good night.
And thanks to everybody. Good night.